In now and we'll start the session. So, hi everyone who have joined us for the webinar today, and welcome to the webinar series. It's called Wildlife Chronicles, and here we at Center for Wildlife Studies brings in guest speakers to talk about a range of topics related to wildlife research and conservation. And if you have missed any of our previous webinars, do check out our previous videos, which is available online. And I'm Shikha, a PhD student at the Center for Wildlife Studies, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Before we begin, I request all of you who have joined us today for the webinar to please keep your mics and videos off so we don't have any disturbances. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box, and I'll try to get as many questions as possible across to our speakers today. So today we are bringing you another exciting topic for discussion, which is bioacoustics and soundscapes, where we deep dive into the fascinating world of sound. For that, we have with us two amazing speakers, Dr. Vivi Robin and Dr. KV Gururaja with us. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our speakers for the day to our audience. Dr. Vivi Robin is a faculty at the Department of Biology at ICER Tirupati. His work broadly covers understanding bird ecology, behavior, biogeography, and evolutionary ecology, specifically in the Shola Sky Islands of the Western Ghats in India. He integrates various methods in his scientific quest, including the use of genetics and bird songs to understand bird evolution and the impact of fragmentation across the Sky Islands. He received the National Geographic Explorer Grant for Research and Exploration in 2012 and 2019. And in 2015, he was part of a collaboration called Sky Island Beatbox, where they used an interesting combination of bird songs, beatbox music, and photos and videos to communicate about the threats to endemic birds of Western Ghats to a much larger audience. The second speaker for the day is Dr. KV Gururaja. He is a faculty at the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology, Bangalore. For over 2 decades, he has been working on Anuran amphibians, studying amphibian ecology, behavior, and the landscapes where they are found. His work has immensely contributed towards the understanding of amphibian distribution across the Western Ghats. He, along with his colleagues, published the Pictorial Guide to Frogs and Toads of Western Ghats, which was followed by the identification app on frogs, Frog Find, which enabled easy identification of frogs and toads of the Western Ghats. A staunch believer in citizen science initiatives to aid long-term monitoring, he is an integral part of Frog Watch under the India Biodiversity Portal. He also co-developed Mandugavani, an acoustic guide to the frogs and toads of the Western Ghats. I welcome our speakers to the webinar and thank you all for participating in this webinar today. I've given a very short introduction to each of our speakers for the kind of work that they have done, and I would actually like to listen more about their work, how they got into bioacoustics, and a little bit about their current project. So I'll start with Robin now.
Yeah, hi. I think the introduction that you gave is perfect. I mean, I don't think I want to add more to that. The only thing that I'd like to say is that at least the way that I've been looking at bioacoustics is more like a tool to understand what birds are doing. Initially, it started out because I was studying this bird that was then called the shortwing, and I was surveying for it. I had the call of it. I went to one mountain. I recorded the song, and then I knew the song. And then I went over to another mountain. So I mean, the first mountain was Munnar, and then I went over to Nilgiris, and the song sounded very different. And I tried some simple playback experiments. They wouldn't respond, and that kind of got me curious. And so I would say in some ways one thing led to the other, from bioacoustics to genetics, to try and understand how evolution has kind of played a role in this whole process. So I think that the bioacoustics has been a very important component, kind of guiding me through understanding what birds are doing. So that's pretty much my motivation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's actually very interesting, and I'll actually come back to you on that later during the webinar. And now, can we have something?
Yes. Thanks, Shika, and thanks, Robin. Thanks for joining. So my story goes back to 2004. Until then, I was basically looking at the ecology of amphibians, but not recording any of those calls. And fortunately, I had a very good supervisor at Center for Ecological Sciences. He got me a digital voice recorder and said, this is for you since you work on frogs. I'm like, what I will do with it? And then suddenly realize, okay, I know what I have to do with this. So without knowing how to operate, without knowing the basics of what kind of bit depth or bit rate at which you record sounds, I just took it, started recording the sound. And that was the first instance. I also got call records of Malabar tree toads, and I was rummaging through references to figure out whether there's any call records from Indian amphibians. There were at that point in time. Devyani was working in Kolkata looking at call records of common frogs like Hoplobotrytis or skittering frogs, but there's nothing on this particular Malabar tree toad. And that's the first time then I said, okay, let me take this call, let me analyze and put it as a small paper. And that's how I switched into bioacoustics, starting as species identification tool. And then it moved on to various levels, which we are going to discuss later on. So the starting point was more of taxonomic identity, or to recognize how a toad would call, right? Especially one of those endemic endangered species kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, an accidental encounter in the beginning.
Yeah.
So actually, we have been saying like acoustics. So since our audience are also like from Brown Range, so can we like simply simplify what acoustics is all about, like such that like any non-scientist who are in our audience can also like understand what we are actually talking about today?
Robin, would you like to take it?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I can, like, my way of the way at least I see it is that you perceive things in with different senses. The most common is visual, and then photography became a representation of what you can see. So acoustics is just doing the other, which is just capturing all the sounds that one can hear. And then it just boils down to so many other ecological things of how sound travels and who's the receiver and so on. So that's where the fun part of the bioacoustics, the bio of the acoustics comes in, I suppose.
Yes. Do you have something to add to that?
Yes. So I will briefly make a sound and then perhaps.
Yes.
So it's not a toad, but it's a toad-like looking like a wooden artifact, and that makes a sound. So in fact, to put it in very layman term or very simple terms, we can call is like sound being produced and sound being received by the receiver is what we look at in bioacoustics. Acoustics is nothing but sound, and bio is what Robin has said. It's from the species, individual who produces to individual who receives. And there are in between so many other things also happen. Eavesdropping also happens in bioacoustics.
Yes, and thanks for showing us that interesting handicraft with you. Yeah, I haven't seen it before, and it's quite interesting. A pretty cool thing to have too. So you also started off with how you sort of accidentally got into bioacoustics. So I'm very sure that you would have like multiple interesting findings through your research or through observation and field. So can you share like some interesting finding that you recorded through acoustic, or which acoustic record is enabled to find, which wouldn't have been possible otherwise?
Yeah. So for me, like as I started with taxonomic pursuit and looking at species differentiating using acoustic as one of the characteristics, like you have morphology, you have osteology, you have molecular things to identify species. Acoustics is also one unique feature of a particular species, like a fingerprint. So no matter how many species are there, each one of them will have their own unique sound signature. And we will figure out what kind of sound signature we are supposed to extract from those sounds. So that's how I started. And like 6 years into it, it was more of collecting more sounds and figuring out what's happening, and more towards looking at the sounds. But it was in 2010 when I was interacting with my collaborator from University of Vienna, Professor Walter Hudl and Doris. So they were looking at visual communication in amphibians. One of the species that we see in the Western Ghats is dancing frog. So it's a frog that actually lifts its hind limb to defend its territory. But in the initial stages, we were comparing it with the Bornean frog. There's also one frog there in Borneo, which also does foot flagging. And we were just trying to compare what happens with the sound. Why do they do foot flagging behavior? So the Bornean species was doing to attract the mate. It was making a thick sound, and then it will stretch both its hind limbs so that the female gets the attention, and then they mate. In addition to that, there was a background noise to the frog which was calling from there. It's called Tuaris latopalmatus. You can search on Google, you will get more details about it. Whereas when we came to Western Ghats and we were looking into this dancing frog, it was not so noisy background. And this frog was actually, in fact, stretching more often, and it was stretching more often with the male individuals. There was no female around nearby. So the question, it became more important for us, like what is happening over here? And that is where we try to figure out whether it is just the sound, it is just the visual, it is all the combination of all these things. We call it as multimodal signaling. That is where we took a leap. Like I personally took a leap from looking beyond just sound analysis to figuring out how sound can be a part of multimodal signaling in amphibians. So finally, at the end of that entire research, what we figured out is that frog does foot flagging, frog does croak, but this particular dancing frog croaks to maintain its territory, just like tigers. So just that was a revelation for us, looking at bioacoustics, looking at its stretching behavior of legs and combination of all this stuff. So it was beyond.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
I think your voice is a little low in between. So if you could
Yeah. So is it fine now? So
yes, it's much better. Yes.
So bioacoustics then just didn't stop at looking at the call patterns. It moved beyond, and we try to integrate with the multimodal signaling in amphibians. And that's what it resulted in saying that the dancing frogs do the dance not just for the sake of attracting the mate, but to defend their territory, as like if you can compare to that of tigers. So tiger defend their territory, perhaps it's the same way frogs do defend their territories, but it's in a small scale.
Yeah, it's interesting like how they use sounds for like different purposes. So Robin, do you have any interesting observations like that?
Yeah, well, yeah, that was fascinating to hear the story from Guru. Yeah. Yeah, I think we have somewhat similar journeys in the sense that my the initial data collection, all of that happened trying to understand speciation. How these birds are different, and it took a while to figure out how to do this. How to do the analysis and so on. Yeah, after that, I think now we have in the lab quite a few really bright people, and we continue to use song to look at how birds differ across the landscape. So, again, if different mountains have different dialects, then we overlay, genetic data to try and understand connectivity and see if there is a relationship between, or rather correlation between these two. So that is one aspect of the things that we do. Then we are also increasingly using automated recorders quite a lot. And yeah, as a side note, I remember seeing a automated recorder in Guru's office once, and he said, you have to watch out because I'm doing a test, and whatever you say will be recorded. So yeah, so that was a good introduction to automated recorders back then. So we use automated recorders to detect several rare endangered birds. We have a collaboration with Shomita Mukherjee from SACON to look at forest owlets. That has gone very well. And also with Jagannathan from NCF to look at Jordan's courser, which is actually in our backyard. I mean, in the sense, Isar Tirupati's backyard. And that also went quite well. Well, we didn't find Jordan's courser, but yeah, we have a great team. Some of them have exceptionally good ears. So they could find that there are birds. There was a bird that was mimicking Jordan's courser that But the good news is that we can now detect birds like Jordan's cursor. So if you have the algorithm, which means that if the Jordan's cursor calls, we can probably detect it, or if we can put out these recorders in those spaces. So we also try to understand behavior by looking at when birds sing. And that seems like a very trivial thing to say because everybody knows birds sing, but the timing of the breeding actually is very tied to climate and climate change and so on. And where most of our work happens is on these mountain tops on Sky Islands, like in Kodaikanal where I am right now, or in Munnar or Nilgiris. And here, as you go from east to west or from low to high elevation, when birds actually start breeding, seems like a very non-trivial, question. So we are trying a little bit to understand how that varies and how possibly that could change in the future with climate change. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that very brief but very detailed also explanation on how differently you can actually use acoustics. Like it's not just about understanding that animals communicate with each other, but understanding that behavior, even like how you said, like different, even the same species which occupies like different geographical locations have like varied sounds. It's actually quite interesting. So one thing that you mentioned about the Jordan's fossa, so you did say that was another bird that mimics it. So even when you're like praising a recorder in a landscape where you're studying, there will be like multiple calls that you record. Like even if you're like going and looking for a certain species, you get like multiple calls. Like cicadas is one thing which is interesting to has like a very loud, interesting call as well. And you capture all these various sounds. So how difficult or challenging it is to, like use acoustic recorder and like piece apart a specific sound that you are actually looking for or is interested in. Yes, Robin, if you could continue on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I think one of the challenges of automated recorders, I mean, I did not want to get into automated recorders as a research, focus because it's really difficult to tease out the signal from the background. I mean, it's noise for some people. If you know what your signal is, you're specifically focused on one thing, like one species, then it's actually better if you have a handheld recorder, you watch the organism and you record it. So that is probably a better representation of the signal. That's the best way you can get it. But in some cases, you can't find the animals that easily. So at those times, or you want to use it to find when the species occurs. So once you have a whole lot of everything recorded, then it's up to an algorithm that you kind of develop to pick out the signal that you want and how much data you have to train. So this is a messy process. It's been quite challenging, but I think there's a lot of success with specific species. And if people have not tried out BirdNet, I mean, that's a really nice output from Cornell. It seems to work quite well for Indian birds as well, where it's an app. You just point it at a bird, and it kind of tells you what species it is. So that's a lot of work getting there.
That's interesting that you can like point the app towards the bird and get those informations. Yeah. So, Gururaja, do you have something to add to that about what challenges have you faced?
Yes. So,
could you speak a little bit louder? So,
sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
So mine is always a story to tell. So where I one of the place where I converge with Robin's bird, the cursor that he was talking about and mimicking of cursor, there's another bird kind of. So for me, it was in 2015, and I was with one of my colleagues from the forest department, and he took out his Nokia phone, which is a old, small sized Nokia phone, and he played a song for me in the sense he played out what he recorded. And for my excitement, and I was like falling off from the chair, I told him on face, you are actually making me to listen to a bird call, and then you are talking that this is a frog species. And that bird call was in fact exactly matching like that of white-throated kingfisher. And that kind of idea lived only for a few seconds, and then I had to make a sorry face there because the person who recorded it knew it was coming from a frog. And then I had to save my face and then say, oh, let's go, let's figure out what it is, and then see whether you can record with the video kind of thing. And this led to discovery of a new species, and which was in the backyard in the coastal regions. And it was, in fact, there's a convergence of call from frog to that of a bird species. And perhaps it's because of the landscape that both of them were calling in a similar manner. Only for me to realize that I cannot be complacent always. Like I know all the frog species or I know all the bird species. There are issues or there are interesting things where it just turns out that people become more observative, and then you start realizing that there's more to this. It's not just this, right? So acoustics actually, in fact, brought that new species into science. At the same time, it also opened up a new thought. Why do frog and bird calls actually converge? There was one paper by Dubois, I think in 1984, where there is a Himalayan bird and a frog species. In fact, they converge in their call pattern. So there is another species now in the western coast where you have a bird which is like a kingfisher, and a frog which is actually almost calling like a kingfisher. So we call it as Machibaticus caravali. That's a different story though. But look at how calls actually have their own story to tell us, and how it actually unites, whether it's a bird watcher or a frog watcher, it doesn't matter. It's the call that actually brings us together, kind of stuff. Yeah, it works very well for me in that sense.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting that like a frog call was similar to a bird call. So just like curious as to why that would have come up.
A good question. Perhaps
Any insight? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, since both we have like a bird expert and frog expert, like.
So with my basic understanding, what I can tell about frog is that it's a fallow land, water, a stagnant area frog species. In the sense, it will be in the coastal plains. It croaks from those plains, but it requires monsoon water to be filled in those lands, and that's when it croaks. I have no clue about the white-throated kingfisher, but we can see white-throated kingfisher in these plains too. Perhaps Robin will be able to tell you about the phylogenetic part of it, and then perhaps we have a later paper to publish, Robin, together.
Sure. I'm sure there would be speculations of why it should be. Yeah, just a curious question.
Yeah.
Yes, sure. Do you have something to say on that, Robin? I think he's having some internet issues.
It appears that, he has some internet issues.
Yeah,
sure. PhD from CES, and Viral Joshi has been working on Sykes lark, which mimics so many birds. And, he kind of thinks that you can look at, it's like sampling the biodiversity of a landscape through its mimicry. Yeah. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure all of this is actually very fascinating. So actually talking about the challenges again, like not going too much technical into it. We do know that when camera trapping was like, we started using camera trapping, it sort of like revolutionized the way that we get insights into like wildlife and the different kinds of behavior that they exhibit. So camera trap is a way to like get a glimpse of the wildlife and the habitat, and which are like using acoustic recorders, we actually are eavesdropping into the lives of these animals as well. So just briefly, can you talk about the, like, since conservation technology is like a emerging field and use of technology is like so useful, a little bit into the sort of technology or the equipment that you use or how you visualize these data. Yeah, Robin, do you want to go ahead?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, so I think so. I'll probably go a little bit beyond that specific point. If you think back about how science or how species were reported, initially you needed a specimen. So if you wanted to say that, okay, I saw this bird at some place, like this bird exists in this place, you needed a specimen from that place to kind of say that yes, this bird is actually like found there. And then came along, cameras where you could represent that bird. And then you could just say that, okay, there is a photographic evidence. And then, Ramana Atreya came along and he actually described an entire bird species with photographs. And that was revolutionary at that point because nobody would consider that in bird taxonomy. So we went from accepting, museum specimens to images, but I think we are still a way to go before we start accepting just sounds as just that alone as evidence for, let's say, the presence of a species or something like that. Everybody would say, but did you see it? Right? So it's like, I have a photograph, but is there a specimen? So that's it's a little bit philosophical as well. But yes, I think as technology improves, as we are able to describe sounds better, I think that this is definitely going to get more and more used in biodiversity research, in conservation, and so on.
Yeah, it also depends on the standards that we are going to set forth, because in initial stages, you used to have magnetic tapes and you have to record sounds, and then you have to digitize it to understand what is happening, kind of thing. But now you have instruments which can be just handheld, and you can go, and more so that the kind of mobile phones that have come now can do wonderful jobs for you. You need not have to really worry about whether you have a solid state mic to record, kind of thing. You can do very well recording even with your smartphone. But the only thing will be how quickly we get into the standards of sharing data, so that it becomes across platforms, we should be able to share it. And then that whatever we are speaking, it has a proper way to describe these standards, kind of stuff. So once that we achieve, I think then perhaps it's just matter of time. And then we say we do not have to see a frog, or you do not have to actually see a bird, but you have an acoustic signal that's enough to identify what it is.
Yeah. Can you also just give a brief on how you visualize these sounds?
Yeah. So basically sound is having, it has two kinds of information. One is the pressure, the other one is the frequency. So pressure is what we measure in terms of decibels, like how loud it is, or like it. Let us say this is the diaphragm of a mic, and the sound is coming. Sound comes generally through the air. There is a medium for that, and it impinges onto the diaphragm, and it vibrates, and that's what you listen to. So the issue is whether you are closer to an organism, how far from organism determines the pressure point. So instead of that, what we generally make use of in our acoustic analysis is the frequency part. So what we do is we look at frequency domain, and then going by the Fourier transformation, which is, let us not go into the technical details of it. It's just to break down all those waveforms into smaller bits of waveforms. It was told some 200 years ago by Fourier, who is a French mathematician. So we were able to do that, and then figure out what kind of frequencies either it's frog or bird or even mammals have those sound frequencies. And then we plot it against the time domain, and so that you will see the energy bands in the sound spectrum. And that's what we see. So if you want to have a quick look at it, I have one particular slide or audio clip to show,
Sure.
but I'm being disabled for screen sharing. If you just allow me for that.
Yes.
I can quickly show Audacity. I'm a proponent of open source software, and for Indians, Raven Pro is actually free of cost. So you can also make use of it.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah. Can I do the screen sharing, Shika? Is it hello?
Yeah, I'm just checking. Yeah.
So in a way, what I'm trying to say
also, could you just speak a little bit louder, because I think there is audio disturbance from here.
Okay.
Hello, may I speak for a moment?
Sure, sir.
Yeah, I'm Sandeep Kulkarni. I want to know from both, I mean from Gururaja and Robin, how long it takes for a person to get into this thing, and then start understanding the sound and correlating it with the animals or the birds, like.
If you put in 24 hours of effort, kind of thing, within one day you will be able to understand what.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of, basically what kind of equipments are etc. required?
You can start with this device. This is called smartphone. You can start
Okay.
with that, and there are softwares which are open source with which you can actually analyze and understand. So I'm just trying to show one particular call, and I will play it. Let us. That's a call of a bird. No, sorry, it's a call of a frog, right? So this is how we see it as waveform, in the sense that the sound has moves like a wave. That's what we see. But when you change it into its spectrogram or the Fourier transform image, so you can see that it has a tonal quality. Can you see this particular way it is seen? So when I play it, you will understand that. So like this is what we make use of, even though there may be disturbances, there are something else coming in between, but we can visualize, we can see it as a signature of a species, right? And then we can also understand how the signatures are different, like what Robin was talking about, like a dictionary or a vocabulary of birds. You can have set of these things as a library and then figure out how different they are. And this is the simplest way to explain how we visualize sound. Robin, you can add if I have missed out something here. I will stop sharing this screen.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You can actually see the repeated patterns in the song.
Yeah. In
Robin,
fact,
do you want to add?
my frog life is much simpler because we are the first one to come with sound. Later on, birds actually evolved with the sound. So our vocabulary is very simple, repetitive calls, whereas Robin's has more tonal qualities to it. This goes up, comes down, all this stuff happens.
Sure.
Yes,
So do you want to like add a little bit on that, Robin? You're muted. Oh, once again, I think there's some issue.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. I can answer myself now. Yeah. No, I think that's pretty. Yeah, I think the question was more about how to get data, right, and how long it takes. Yeah, and I would completely agree with what Guru was saying, that it really depends on what we want to study. So if there is more diversity, then it just takes much longer to describe it. So just a lot more data to collect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also difficult to like tease apart these different sounds that you actually capture in like one setting, I guess. Yeah. So again, like because you mentioned how in the earlier time we needed a type specimen to actually like consider it as a species or a new species. So even like acoustic recordings, it actually like developed much longer, right? People were like recording these sounds even like back in 1940s or even before that, I guess. But like bioacoustics as a specific field is just like gaining popularity or interest recently, if I'm correct. So why do you think there is such a long gap in like this field becoming so popular or like very significant in our field? Robin, do you want to take that? Okay, so I'll just like check that. Gururaja, do you want to take that question first then? Okay, 1 second, sorry. I think there is some confusion there.
Okay, so I'm open now.
Yeah.
That's fine. Can you just repeat that last part of your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering like why it took so long time.
Perhaps there are the technological advancement. It was also happening, and at the same time, it was expensive. In the sense to have a mic, parabolic mic recording device, or even to have a cardioid mic kind of thing, it would cost you perhaps kidney or something of that sort. You have to sell your kidney to get one recording device, right? So it took long time for us to actually come in consensus in reducing prices so that it can be used everywhere kind of thing. And it was also only for privileged institutes who can afford it, can get it and record it. And there were only few people who can actually understand how to record it. So there were those things which were all perhaps like a hidden method kind of stuff, but it only slowly opened up in the last couple of decades. And that's why, and more laboratories also opened up in doing sessions for people in understanding how sound will be recorded, how you are going to analyze those sounds kind of thing. Like Cornell Lab is one such lab where I was also trained to figure out how sounds can be analyzed kind of stuff. So it's only in the last 2 decades, I believe, it has actually taken more widespread approach. Otherwise, it was more confined to Western countries and in that too in specific regions where they used to record, even landscape recordings were all being done. Robin, you can add if I had missed out some points over there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's it's these limitations that have been there. The hardware, then there's also the software. Earlier, the software that was there for wildlife and biodiversity acoustics was kind of limited. And until Raven came along, I mean, Raven is today free for at least people from developing countries. And it's a great resource. So until these resources came along, I think it was difficult to do. And I think the other component has also been there have been very few trained people doing bioacoustics, and yeah, so all of us kind of just learned through the very few people who are in India, or we've had to go abroad to specialized labs where we could learn. So I think those things should change soon.
Yeah, sure. The technology does play a big role in how the field also like came up. Yes. So talking about like earlier acoustics, so there was this album called as Songs of the Humpback Whale, which was released back in 1970s or so. So these were actually like humpback whale recordings, which were accidentally recorded and were like given open to the public, and it actually sort of like went viral. It may use that word itself with the people, and it actually like invoked that feeling in people that these creatures are actually like intelligent beings which are able to like make a song. And this was also used as a tool to sort of like ban commercial whale activities in multiple countries, and started the widespread movement called as the Save the Whale movement. So I also know that Robin, you were part of Sky Island Beatbox, which almost did the same thing as to like bring acoustics or bird recordings to the larger public. So uh, what's your take on like using acoustics as a conservation tool? Yes, give me a sec. Okay, Gururaja, do you want to take
No,
that
now
first?
Robin can unmute. That's
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think,
Sorry for the glitch.
yeah, I wonder if it would help if you could make us co-host or something like that. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, who did that? So the Beatbox project was actually a fun project. I don't think so. The idea was that we just wanted to kind of take this idea of these birds that are there in people's backyards. So if you are in Nilgiris or Kodaikanal or Munnar, actually a lot of these very threatened endemic birds are literally around people's backyards, but nobody knows them. Nobody knows that that's the case. So trying to kind of tell the story just with a different medium. So Ben Mirren came along and he had this fantastic talent in trying to make music with bird songs. It worked really well. At one place in Kodaikanal, we were doing this whole beatbox thing, and Ben was playing the sound of a laughing thrush, and there was a laughing thrush at the window, actually just outside the window, responding to the song, literally. Later, we heard from one of the students who attended that he decided to take wildlife as a career option, because so he didn't realize it was me. So he was telling me there was somebody who came and did some song and dance and beatbox and things like that, and then that really changed how I thought about animals. And then that person decided to take wildlife as a career. So I think that's pretty rewarding. Although I just did it for fun, I think it does kind of, there are ways to communicate, strong conservation messages and have impact with bioacoustics.
Yeah, Gururaja, do you want to add to that, since you also have like immensely contributed to the field? Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that we always keep reminding ourselves is to enjoy what we do. So and at the same time to motivate people who are around you. So you like conservation cannot happen within the four walls of the room, and I cannot only be doing the frog call records and come back and just publish papers. So in the field, people are very inquisitive. What I do, what happens, why this frog is calling like a bird or something of those things. So the whole idea then became, first of all, do we have any call record database for frogs of India, or at least Western Ghats? So that is when our Mandukavani started taking shape, and then it's also not possible for one person to do so many records of these species, because even working in one part of Western Ghats, you have about 30-35 species. So how far you can travel, how many nights you have to spend to record these calls, kind of thing. So that's when we also thought about involving more people, asking them to give their recordings and with due credits, kind of thing. That's when we started Mandukavani with Ramya, with Sheshadri, with Rami Singhal. And this is how we are still proposing in the same way to build a network of people where they can just have one standard recording kind of stuff. Say, make a record in waveform, have 44.1 kilohertz sample rate, 16-bit rate, and that's it. So once you record in that for about 1 or 2 minutes, that's enough information in that it can be taken for many years to analyze and understand what is happening, kind of thing. And if, let us imagine, so many people in Western Ghats, so many people in Delhi or any city, if they go out in monsoon and at least spend 1 minute of their evening and record 1 minute sound, imagine how much data that we are going to see. And it's not just about the data over here. I'm also linking that with the kind of thoughts that we bring in, like climate change, what we talk about. So what happens to frogs, whether they are breeding previous to monsoon? Has the breeding season receded nowadays? Has it prolonged? What is the issue? So all these things can be addressed if you have that 1 minute record done for a long duration of like many years. So you will start understanding what is happening. But without people's participation, it's not going to happen. So that is where all these thoughts of not individual, but it's a collective effort that has come into the picture, and more so with the sound records of frogs.
Yeah, definitely. It should be actually a collective effort to like bring in more information on all species and all sectors. Yeah. So I also understand that in some parts of the world they do use acoustic recorders to sort of like trace illegal activities within these forests. So talking about conservation, so placing these recorders inside the forest to maybe like identify poaching activities or like illegal timber logging, those kind of activities. What do you have to say on that, or do you think there is scope for such activities within India as well?
Absolutely. So there are people, I can name him. I think Abhi is one such person who is looking into making use of algorithms to figure out what are natural sounds versus what are man-made sounds, kind of stuff. And then you place these, and these recording devices, as I said earlier it used to cost you a lot of money. Now it's within like $50. $50, you can procure 2 or 3 instruments. So when such price has come down to such level, so what you need now to do is how to procure, how to analyze, how to set certain algorithms to figure out what is happening. And there's a whole new field of soundscape ecology is emerging. So they are also trying to figure out whether there's anthrophony, whether it's geophony, whether it's biophony, kind of thing. What is their relationship? Who is actually taking much larger sound space compared to other two, kind of stuff. So in a way, we are going into conservation by just recording the sounds or analyzing the sound, if I can put it in that sense. So we are actually moving to conservation through sounds, in fact.
Sure. Robin, do you want to add to that? Because I do understand like your students are also looking at like children's sports here, like which is like a very elusive species as well. So more on
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Guru. It's just a matter of time before bioacoustics starts being used more and it's just up to the creativity of people to figure out how to use this technology. Now we have powerful algorithms that can identify sounds, and then you have very good hardware. So coupled together, it's just up to the creativity of people to find solutions for a lot of problem, detecting several issues and so on. Yeah, we do have a lot of bioacoustic problems, that's for sure. Yeah.
I agree with that, Robin. We do have, but like one of the example, which is not at all directly related with my annual acoustics or behavior kind of thing. We did it in Bangalore, in one of the wards in Bangalore, Yelahanka. What we did was we placed our, instead of placing recording devices, we asked our students to record sounds using their phone for 12 hours. At like at every 15 minutes, record for 1 minute kind of thing. So at the end of the day, you had so much of sound, right? So 12 into 4, 48 minutes of sound recording you have. So when you analyze the sound in relation to the landscape that you are in, whether you are closer to a park, whether you are closer to a highway, whether you are closer to a residential area, you start seeing the kinds of sound that emerges out, right? So where you have birds like making sound in the morning to only the sirens of the railway, you can clearly figure out what is happening to those areas. And you can also bring in the relationship, what is the impact on their head, like what is their day-to-day life will be if they are listening to so much of sound, right? So these are new ways to look at it. It's not necessary that it's only through visual we will be able to understand. It's also about listening. So how better you are able to listen and analyze the sound, you can actually talk about the landscape.
yeah, sure. Like just like even sounds are being used to even understand like different landscapes, which is like very interesting. Like in different ways we can use acoustic recordings.
Yeah.
So just to the audience, we have started taking in questions from the audience as well. So if you have questions, do type it. So we do have a couple of questions right now. So the first is, with development in machine learning, can we deconvolute mixed bird call recordings? And a second one is that can we also record sounds that are beyond human range? Do they provide interesting information? So who wants to go first with this? Since you're nodding, I'll pick you. Gururaja. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So machine learning can be coupled with to come out with looking at different sounds. It's possible. People are trying to work around. You can also make use of artificial intelligence to figure out what is happening. Only thing is you need more number of data to actually train your machine than to arrive at and saying this is what it is, right? So that's the first part of your question. Can I have the second part a bit? I think I missed out.
Yeah, so Varun is also asking, can we also record sounds that are beyond human range? Do they provide interesting information?
As of now, like we have only a couple of species which are in the world of amphibians, which are croaking beyond human audible range, which is about 20 kilohertz or so, which is too much for a human ear to comprehend. But if you look at the waveforms or the spectrogram, then you will figure out there is something that is coming up. So all these things are new even for bioacoustic people themselves, because initially we started off with frogs have only this particular range of sound, say like 2 kilohertz to perhaps maximum is about 6 kilohertz kind of thing. Now you are seeing something which is beyond 22 kilohertz, which is really shocking in the sense, how can they croak in that manner? So there are, I think, in a couple of years down the line, we have some interesting things coming out of frog calls, which are beyond human audible range kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Robin, do you want to add to that? Like how do we?
Yeah, I think again, like as Guru had said earlier, as technology gets better, I think we are also able to, like, the hardware to record these sounds is also getting a lot better. So now there are hydrophones that are, not that expensive, you can record sounds that are underwater. So I have a student who's working, Isha Bupardikar, who's working on marine mammals on the West Coast. And she's actually trying to estimate numbers of individuals based on these, the sounds that these animals produce. So I think that as technology gets better and as our ability to detect it with good analytical skills get better, there's a lot more that we will be able to kind of decipher from our natural world, about things that are happening around which are not audible to us. So yeah, I think the future looks great. Yeah.
So if I can bring quickly the analogy, like how satellite imagery is once looked at saying, will we be able to distinguish different features in satellite imagery? Now you see that it has become so mundane, kind of everybody knows how you can do it. And even Google gives you a picture, you can understand what it looks like. So sound also will go, perhaps will be much better in days to come. And then you know that it will be very easy for you to record sound and actually figure out what is happening with that sound simultaneously.
Yes. So Nikhil is asking something that we touched upon, and maybe you could elaborate it a bit. So do same species present in different geographic locations produce different call patterns?
In fact, if you ask me, in frog world, even two individuals sitting next to each other can produce different sounds. So it is the difference that we are marking it as different species, that what, or different individual is what matters. So if you have hundreds of calls from two individuals and then figure out there are subtle variations, right? But they are not two distinct species though. So that is where you need to figure out what is the boundary that you have set in for differentiating between species versus differentiating between individuals, right? It cannot be the same scale, because variation between individuals are very minute compared to variation between two species.
Yes, and individual variation is also definitely there. Yeah, Robin, go ahead.
No, I'd just like to add to that. I think that's perfect. That's true in the sense that we should look at variation as, within individual variation, then between individuals, and then between populations and between species. So it's like a kind of nested kind of thing. And with birds, there's a lot of data about such variation. And we know that if there is an individual, then the neighbor often shares some parts of the dialect with that neighbor. And as your distance increases, the degree of your similarity and what you share kind of decreases. And the analogy that I often use for bird song, especially working with the forest department, they're often asking, why do you want to study bird song? But then if you can explain to them that people on one side of Western Ghats speak Tamil, but on the other side speak Malayalam. And, this is largely just geographic isolation. So it's very similar for birds as well. When you have isolated populations, that they could have different songs. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes, that does. So the next question is, just like we can study some aspects of animals through photos and videos, what can we decipher from audio recordings?
Many things. It's like it all depends on the question that you have in mind. It starts from whether it's a different species to start with, or whether we know anything about the species call, and then you see whether this species call is an advertisement call, or it's a reciprocal call, or it's a threat call. So you can start categorizing that, and then you can also figure out like how, if there are two individuals very close by, how the other individual try to croak or change the tonal qualities. Because in the frog world, the sex ratio is very skewed. There will be at least 10 males for one female. So they need to actually like croak their heart out, right, to impress a female. And then it is not just one individual which will female will be looking at. So they want to confuse the female. So all 10 will start croaking together. So then your complication will start, like the complexity of the call will also increase. So how do then frogs will understand? So if that is your question, then you have to figure out when they bulge their lungs, there is a kind of what you do, the noise cancellation happens to the individual. So when they're actually taking the air inside, they are not listening to the sound at all. When they're croaking, that's where they are producing the sound. So in a way, like, you can tease into multiple levels, from multimodal signaling, communication, behavioral things, to as simple as identifying and making a database of sound. So there are spectrum of things that you can do with this call recordings and call analysis.
Yes, thanks. Dr. Robin, do you want to add something to that?
No, actually, that's perfect. I mean, I think Guru's described most of the breadth there.
Yeah, a wide variety of things. So next question from Aditya. Could you please suggest any beginner recording devices other than smartphones? Robin, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, so the smartphones do well, but if you want to look at something, the next step, I think that there is something, the Zoom recorders are very good. This is a Zoom F1. Yeah, yeah. I think that's Zoom F. So Zoom F1, it's some of them come with a small shotgun microphone as well, and that's just it's fantastic. So we have yeah. So yeah, Guru's got the whole works. Yeah, so it just works really beautifully. Yeah, you have to remember that you know, your choice of recorder microphone, it really depends on what you want to study or what you want to record. So of course, if it's a bat, then you go, you know, there's a different kind of detector. For birds and frogs, now I understand from Guru that, you know, it's mostly within the human hearing. But there are some mammals that go under, some that were over. So just a little bit of background check, and for most birds, I think definitely the simple recorders work quite well.
Like I would definitely add to what Robin is saying.
Sure, and if you could also show the recorders that you have, I don't think that people might have seen it. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So so what I wanted to add is that it all depends on the question. So as long as your question, like it is how you make a film. So you say that I want to make a film like BBC, then perhaps you may require the kind of equipment that they use, right? But your question is what actually motivates you to have the kind of instrument that you want to use. It is not the other way around. So since I have a bigger instrument, then I will have a greater question. No, that's not the way to have a good question, and then perhaps your equipment will start supporting, and you will also start knowing what is the limitation of your equipment. So without knowing that, it will be like shooting in the dark kind of stuff. You perhaps will spend lakhs together in procuring, and then say, I just wanted to record whatever comes behind my door kind of stuff. So that will be problematic. So ask your question, make your question pertinent, and then perhaps look for the instrument. And there are a lot of people who can support you in saying which equipment actually works well.
Yeah, again, it all comes down to what sort of questions you want to ask. Yeah. Definitely. So we have another question from Rahul, who asked, how can you check the status of a forest using bioacoustics?
Wow. Robin, would you like to take it?
Yeah.
And then I will speak.
Well, yeah. So first thing is that we need established baselines, and I'm not sure we have established baselines. So I think what we need to understand, so there are some fantastic studies that are coming out of the US and several other places, identifying where, you know, what is the natural soundscape like? What is a natural, you know, soundscape is just like landscape, but with sound, as Guru was pointing to earlier. So this is not described very well. And I think that once we start describing it, we are going to get into some really tricky territory, because you know, noise pollution and the effect of noise pollution, as described in a lot of Western literature, is from vehicular traffic or, you know, movement of things and things like that. But in India, we have a wide diversity of you know, celebrations, religious festivals. I mean, literally every national park, every area, you know, the buffer zone or there's noise. There's a lot of noise. We do things with a lot of noise. So once we have this, I think there'll be a whole Pandora's box that's going to open up. So I don't know what more to say. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the great examples that you can check online on a TED Talk is Bernie Cross 15-minute TED Talk. If you happen to have time, please listen to it. So he shows how, like, from 1960 onwards, he was recording the soundscape sounds. But if you look at India, you don't have, as Robin was mentioning, there is no baseline record. At least if you start now, perhaps in 20, 25 years down the line, you will be able to tell what is happening to the landscape, how much diversity we are losing, or what is actually changing the qualities of sound, kind of stuff. So one needs to have that baseline information set, and perhaps later on we can definitely build on understanding how soundscape will work and what is happening with that. And you can actually then extrapolate to larger questions of climate change or landscape change, kind of stuff. But it all requires that baseline information to be there, to be accessible to many, and it is with certain standards.
Yes, just like databases for each species, we do need databases for these landscapes as well.
Yeah.
So we are actually coming towards the end of the session, and I have one last question here, which I actually kept it for the end. So are there open source citizen science projects where beginners can contribute? For example, building a large database of ecological soundscapes. So this was asked by Nathan. Can you take that first? Yeah, Robin.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I'd like to point to, the eBird app for birds, which works very well for reporting birds, but also they have a ability to you can record and upload bird calls just from your phone or from anything else also. So the Macaulay library is a good place to go to. You can also look at Xenocanto, which has a lot of bird calls. But Macaulay has, the wave format of calls, which is slightly higher quality than the MP3 that Xenocanto has.
So for India, for at least certain species of frogs, we have kept it on India Biodiversity Portal. And India Biodiversity Portal Frog Watch has opened up for even sound records. So if you have recorded a sound from your backyard, you can just post it saying that this is from such and such place, this is recorded in such and such date, and this is in this particular format. That is fine, it is acceptable, and it is under Creative Commons licensing. You can make use of it. You can also see what others have put in over there. So this is how we are slowly building. But again, some of the things has to have some standards on which you can actually further the questions or analyze it in a certain manner. Otherwise, as of now, you can put it in these kind of like Xenocanto or Macaulay library, what Robin was mentioning, all these places where you can actually see, hear, you can also post, and all this data will be in your name. You need not have to really worry, right? Majority of the case, that's what the worry will be. If I give a sound, what will happen to the sound? Don't worry, your record will be in your name. Nobody is going to snatch it. Perhaps people will make use of it if it has a good quality sound and to understand certain questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So actually, before we end, I would like to know if there is any suggestion or advice that you would want to give to someone who want to start with bioacoustics.
Robin, go.
Yeah, it depends on what it is for. Like if you're an enthusiast, I think that it's great. It's a great tool because you start getting more connected to nature. You're just paying a little bit more attention, right, to what is going on around you. And like we said, you just need a phone or something like that if you want to kind of document stuff. If you're a student and you want to study things with bioacoustics, I think it's very important to think about what exactly you want to study. Is it the behavior, or do you want to use it as additional data to support some taxonomy, or so depending on that, you want to probably build on the idea and then use bioacoustics as a tool, at least the way that we are talking about it. But there are people who do bioacoustics just as for itself, and that's a different field. But definitely it's interdisciplinary because it brings in aspects of physics. There is neurobiology, there is ecology. So you can approach it from any side you like, depending on the skills and interests and motivation that you have.
So I would say this book. Right. I'm just showing it because you can go through and understand how deep the subject will be. It all depends on your interest and then your questions that you want to take forward.
So yes, actually that was some good advice, and I think some of the audience at least would be interested in like taking it forward much better. So actually we are coming to the end of this webinar, and I do feel from this conversation that people do take it granted for the sounds that you have around you. And actually, it was actually interesting because during the COVID lockdown itself, like there was no noise, like external vehicular noise, that it was like really pleasant to like hear to nature. So thank you, Robin and Gururaja, for actually coming to the CWS webinar today, for the time, and also like sharing stories and your expertise with us. It was wonderful to hear all those stories and also like imagine those sounds maybe of different species. So definitely had an interesting chat. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Shika.
Yeah,
thank you,
thank you.
Robin.
Yeah, and also hope
Nice.
the audience enjoyed and learned with us today. And Wildlife Chronicles is a series of webinars that we are hosting. Do check out our pages for other interesting topics that are lined up. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, one and all. Bye. Bye.